Welcome to Global Edge, where geopolitics meets raw reality, and we go beyond the sound bites to uncover what's really at stake. Today, we're breaking down Ukraine's boldest move yet, a direct and urgent call for long-term funding from the West to keep its defense forces and its war effort alive and active. Billions in aid year after year. But here's the real question. Is this smart strategic support to hold the line against Russian aggression, or an open-ended financial commitment with no clear exit plan? As leaders debate and allies hesitate, the stakes couldn't be higher, not just for Ukraine, but for global security. So if you're the kind of viewer who wants the truth behind the headlines and analysis that cuts through the noise, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell icon. Join the conversation and stay ahead of the story. 1. Ukraine's billion-dollar pitch. In a bold and surprising shift, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has gone beyond the usual appeals for weapons and ammunition. He's now making a much bigger ask, one that signals a new phase in the war effort. Zelensky is calling on Western allies not just for short-term help, but for long-term guaranteed financial support to keep Ukraine's military fully operational for the foreseeable future. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars per year, not as a one-time emergency package, but as a standing commitment with no set end date. It's a dramatic escalation, not on the battlefield, but in diplomacy and expectations. This new request reframes Ukraine's position on the world stage. It's no longer simply a country asking for assistance, it's a frontline nation demanding true partnership in a drawn-out war. In the US, and this means pushing for multi-year congressional funding commitments, even as political divides grow. In Europe, it means reshaping the EU's defense budget and strategic priorities to include Ukraine, not just as a neighbor in crisis, but as a core part of the continent's security structure. For Ukraine, this approach is about survival, but also about stability and predictability. Constant uncertainty in aid flows can cripple military planning and morale. What Zelensky is asking for is not just money, but reliability, a signal to both allies and adversaries that Ukraine will not be abandoned, and that the West is in this for the long haul. But with rising domestic pressures in the US and Europe, inflation concerns, and upcoming elections, this request raises difficult questions. How long can the West sustain this level of support? Is this a strategic investment in global security, or an open-ended financial burden with no clear victory in sight? One thing is certain. Ukraine's war is now as much about political will as it is about weapons. 2. Who's paying and how much? As of mid-2025, the United States has already committed more than $170 billion in total aid to Ukraine, an enormous sum by any measure. And Europe isn't far behind. In fact, several EU member states are pledging even more collectively, aiming to match or surpass US support through a mix of military assistance, financial backing, and humanitarian aid. The level of commitment so far has been historic, but now Ukraine is asking for something even more ambitious, a formal long-term funding mechanism that would guarantee ongoing support year after year. This proposal goes far beyond one-off aid packages. Ukraine wants something institutional, something that looks more like a standing military alliance than an emergency response. Some in Kiev have even suggested it could be modeled after NATO's Article 5, a shared commitment to act when one nation is under threat. In this case, not necessarily through direct military intervention, but through steady, reliable financial support. Essentially a war fund that doesn't rely on constant political battles or shifting public opinion. But this new ask comes with serious questions. Should Western taxpayers be expected to support an open-ended conflict, possibly for many more years, with no clear resolution in sight? How long can the US and Europe keep up this level of spending while facing their own domestic economic and political challenges? And what if they can't or won't commit to this level of support long-term? Because if that funding dries up, even partially, the consequences could be massive. Ukraine's ability to defend itself could collapse. Russian forces might regain the upper hand, and the message to authoritarian regimes around the world could be dangerously clear. Western support has limits. That's why the debate around this proposed war fund isn't just about money. It's about values, strategy, and the future of global alliances. 3. Strategic necessity or financial quagmire. Proponents of long-term support for Ukraine argue that this is not just a regional conflict, it's a global battle for democracy. In their view, Ukraine stands at the front line of a larger ideological struggle. A victory for Russia wouldn't just redraw borders in Eastern Europe. It would send a powerful message to autocratic regimes around the world. From Beijing to Tehran, authoritarian leaders would see Western democracies as weak, divided, and unwilling to stand by their principles when the stakes get high. Supporters of aid believe that if the West fails in Ukraine, it risks encouraging future aggression in Taiwan, the South China Sea, the Middle East, and beyond. But critics see a very different picture. They warn that this could be the start of an Afghanistan-style quagmire, where military and financial commitments keep growing, public interest starts to fade, and there's no clear path to victory. They argue that pouring tens of billions into a war with no defined endgame or exit strategy is risky, especially as domestic pressures mount. Inflation, rising debt, and political fatigue could make continued support unsustainable, even in countries that have so far been strong backers of Ukraine. In this view, the danger isn't just strategic, it's psychological. As the war drags on, voters may begin to question whether this is still a fight for democracy or a costly foreign entanglement with no end in sight. The longer it lasts, the more it risks becoming a political liability for leaders who support it, especially with elections looming across the West. That tension between moral responsibility and strategic caution is shaping the next phase of the global response to Ukraine. 4. NATO, politics, and the price of alliance. NATO has been carefully walking a tightrope, providing Ukraine with weapons, training, and vital support while doing everything possible to avoid triggering a direct military clash with Russia. It's a high-stakes balancing act, helping Ukraine defend itself without escalating the conflict into a wider war involving NATO forces. But now Ukraine's demands have grown bolder and clearer. President Zelensky is saying that if Western countries won't commit troops to fight alongside Ukrainian forces, then they need to step up with something just as serious: steady, large-scale financial support. This means not just one-off aid packages or occasional weapons deliveries, but a reliable long-term flow of funds to keep Ukraine's defense effort fully operational. At the same time, the political landscape in the West is shifting under intense pressure. Elections are fast approaching in major powers like the United States, the United Kingdom, and across the European Union. As these votes draw near, leaders face a growing divide between maintaining their geopolitical commitments and managing rising domestic fatigue. Many citizens are weary of a conflict far from home, concerned about economic challenges, and questioning how long their governments can sustain such heavy involvement. This divide between international responsibility and local political realities is putting leaders in a difficult position, one that will shape the future of support for Ukraine and the stability of the broader international order. The ethical dilemma. Should the West feel a moral responsibility to fund the defense of a sovereign nation indefinitely, no matter how long the conflict lasts? Or is there a point where solidarity turns into overreach, where the costs outweigh the benefits? This is a question many policymakers and citizens are now wrestling with. Supporting Ukraine means standing up for freedom and self-determination, but it also means committing resources, money, weapons, and political capital, potentially for years to come. At its core, this debate goes beyond just sending weapons or financial aid. It's about deeper values, national interests, and the capacity of democratic countries to sustain long, difficult conflicts. Do democracies have the patience and unity needed to back a protracted war, especially when the results are uncertain? Or will domestic pressures and shifting priorities force a change in course? The answer will shape not only Ukraine's future, but the future of global alliances and the broader fight between democracy and authoritarianism. What do you think? Should the West keep funding Ukraine's war machine indefinitely, no matter how long it takes? Or is it time to set new limits and rethink the strategy? We want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and join the conversation. If this video made you think differently or gave you new insights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others who care about understanding world events. You're watching Global Edge. where complex global issues come into sharp focus and you get the real story behind the headlines.